I wonder if we could all take a seat so we can get started. I'm paying these guys by the hour, so. Okay, well, welcome back from the networking break. I know everybody loves networking. There will be another very brief intermission after this panel, a time to network with your neighbor, stand up, stretch a little bit while we reset the stage. But that will only be a few, 5 minutes or so. So without any further delay, I would like to introduce this panel. Our purpose this morning with the panels was first to take some real thought leaders in innovation and get you thinking about how you can be creative and innovative, and how our organizations can foster creativity and innovation. So we're going to get you up to 50,000 feet real fast here. And then in the second panel, the idea was we wanted to identify some entrepreneurs that had that creative and innovative idea, and they took the entrepreneurial leap. And they launched a business, and they took the risk, and they're dealing on a daily basis, living with that risk. So it's my pleasure to welcome the panel. First is noted author and inventor, Dr. David Pensak, author of Innovation for Underdogs. Joining Dr. Pensak is Dr. Alfred Spector, Vice President of Research and Special Initiatives for Google. Pretty interesting. You know how innovative Google is. You got the people sitting here that are thinking what Google's going to do in 5 or 10 years. Imagine what that must be like. And moderating the panel is Dinette Rivera, one of my colleagues here that helps at the university and counsels the businesses around Delaware and Maryland and New Jersey. So Dinette Rivera is president of the Rivera Business Development Group. So welcome me in joining the panel.
Good morning. First of all, thank you for joining us today here at the President's Forum. As president and CEO of the Rivera Business Development Group and working with in entrepreneurship education and training, I have the privilege of working with innovators every day because I work so often with startup businesses, particularly mentoring the student businesses. And so one of our challenges as innovators is how do we get the buy-in from those that may not have the same vision that we have as innovators? So I would like to afford first to David to get started and talk a little bit about his work, and then to really talk about how you get the buy-in as an innovator and how do we develop more innovative thinkers. David?
Well, thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here. It's sort of poetic. Whenever I start a new project, I always make sure to have Google at my side, and the organizers made sure I had Google at my side even up here.
Thank you.
When President Harker talked about the importance of the university in all this process, he understated what to me is the most critical aspect, and that's to provide a broad education to those of you who may turn out to be the leaders of the next century's economy. The two most important books that you as potential innovators need to read are Gulliver's Travels and The Wizard of Oz. And you're probably thinking I was smoking something during the break that I didn't get at the corner drugstore. If you think about The Wizard of Oz, the lion, the tin man, and the straw man were all woefully deficient, they thought, in certain skills. They didn't have a heart, they didn't have a brain. But as they're helping Dorothy get to the Emerald City, they show they have those skills. The wizard recognized this, gave them each a placebo, and gave them permission. You already have innovative and imaginative skills. The critical role of the university is to give you permission to be what you already are. And the reason for Gulliver's Travels, and I read it when I was a little kid, and I thought it was cute, missed 99% of what it had to say. But if you remember, Lemuel Gulliver, when he lands on Lilliput, he's a lot bigger than they are. Big companies need extensive coaching and advice on how to work with startups and new initiatives. It's not been part of their culture, so they're as afraid of you as you are of them. And then ultimately, Lemuel Gulliver moves to Brobdingnag, where he's small and everybody else is big. And the same thing happens as little companies grow. They don't know how to change how they deal with the organizations that they must work with on the outside. Because you've got the problem that many of the small companies die because a big company says, you're going to get this great order from me if you do this. Okay, now do this, now do that. All of a sudden, little company's out of cash. So reading Gulliver's Travels will help you to understand how not to depend on big companies who are going to bring you that one big order that can make or break you.
Thank you. And Al, I guess the question we were speaking before the panel, that your role with Google is really to help the innovators that are already there. So how do you do your work at Google?
So that is indeed what I do. Obviously, one person can't envision everything in a company now of the size of Google scale. So what we really have to do is create an environment where about 10,000 engineers and scientists feel free to be entrepreneurs. I want to note here in this meeting, entrepreneurship is not just for little companies. That's a nice thing, but entrepreneurship is essential in big companies. It's essential in my opinion, increasingly essential in universities. So if there are university administrators here, I want to make that message very clear. And it's very important in government as well. So entrepreneurship is needed across the board, and we need it at Google, even though we are now a rather large organization. So how do we do that? I think there are three things that I think about. Number one is we have to make sure that there's an umbrella of opportunity for people. People see there's an opportunity to do something that is great. The second is we have to provide a fertile environment for doing that. So it has to be relatively possible to do it. And third, you have to have talent. So let me make that clearer, because maybe that's obvious to everyone that those three ingredients are there, but let me make it a little bit clearer. So at Google, we're blessed with an amazing mission statement, which is to organize the world's information and to make it universally accessible and useful. So that's a great mission statement. It excites people from the view of trying to improve the world. It excites computer scientists and electrical engineers because there are fascinating challenges about how to organize all the world's information and make it universally accessible. For example, we now are translating among 53 different languages on the Google site, and that's considered one of the grand challenge problems of the field of computer science. So that's an example. So we have an opportunity. That's number one. You need to have the right opportunity so that people with passion jump out of bed in the morning and want to work their tails off on it. Second, you have to provide a fertile environment. So what has proven to be very fertile at Google is this notion of services-oriented computing, providing computer technology which we can run on large servers that we then make available to a large worldwide user base. And that's an important differentiator from pretty much everything that came before us, because we can innovate with far fewer impediments to the launch of a product. If we get some people to write a very good service accessible from a browser, we can put it on our website and essentially instantly make it available to order of magnitude 1 billion people with no need to go press CDs, no reason to create a gigantic marketing campaign. We can make it available. And if people find it and like it, it's great. And if they don't, well, that's also okay. We didn't spend all that much money on the marketing. We don't have to have everything be a success. I noticed someone earlier today said we have a very high success rate. I'm not certain that's the right metric for entrepreneurship. So I just want to go on record. I don't know who it was that said it. We want a high return on investment aggregated across a lot of things, but not necessarily a high success rate, because that probably means we're being too conservative. The third thing is talent. We have to have the talent. So Google's founders were very talented computer scientists, and they believed very strongly that computer science was going to be an element in changing the way advertising is done, changing the way people see media, changing obviously relating to the mission of Google. So it's always had a focus on talent. And an example of one thing we do is I'm blessed with the amazingly wonderful opportunity to run our internship program worldwide. We bring in about 1,000 students a year. For all I know, we screen, I don't know, 50,000 resumes to get those 1,000 or something like that. So it's not an easy job to get, but we get very talented people, and it's a great opportunity. That's the kind of thing you have to do to foster talent. So that's kind of what I do.
Wonderful. Well, so let's say we've read the book, we've read The Wizard of Oz, and we have leaders in our organization that will help the innovators, and I have the advantage of working with internships every semester, so I understand that it just brings new thinking on a regular basis when you work with students and interns. So let's say we all have that. So David, how then do we work? What do we do in Delaware to get Delaware to move forward in this entrepreneurial ecosystem?
Delaware is blessed with an enormous number of, as I said recently, unemployed from all the downsizing, an amazing number of talents. We have a proposal into the state right now to create a special innovation zone, which is something like a special economic zone that Hong Kong is to China, but starts early in the process. Everybody has dreams, but you need to provide guidance and advice to them to make sure that the dream they're pursuing is not just something that will work for them, but has potential value to other people, has economic value, can be repurposed. So we're very hopeful that the state will do that. In the interim, the university has been wonderfully aggressive in listening to ideas like this and starting to move their infrastructure to become the intellectual and spiritual resource for innovators throughout the state. And I think that's one of the reasons Delaware is going to come out of this very, very well.
Wonderful. Al, can you weigh in on?
Well, I certainly have to focus on this from what I know. I'm not an expert in, say, chemistry and computational chemistry like my colleague here, but I know a lot about computer science, and that's my field. So I would suggest that one of the key things in entrepreneurship in almost every discipline is going to be the role of computer science within that discipline. I mean, David, you were very early into that in chemistry, among the earliest people anywhere that were using computers in the understanding of chemical reactions and the design of molecules. This is decades ago, and of course that's blossomed since then. But we see that in everything. So I talk frequently about CS plus X for all X. The assistant director of the National Science Foundation, who is responsible for computer science in the NSF, Dinette Rivera, talks about computational thinking, which is a placeholder for the idea that we should be training really everyone in society, read every entrepreneur in society, to understand the role of algorithms and abstraction and the capability of large amounts of data to impact things. So I think there's a big role for education. I think education has to take into account the computational sciences. I think they should play a role every bit as big in university curricula as, say, psychology and economics does today, which are usually the largest courses. It's surprising that computation is not as large a role from my perspective, because I think it's going to be ever more important in society. I also think there's a role for the use of information technology to change education itself. And I think that we can do education more effectively when it's more personalized, and computers can be involved in that personalization. I think we can do it more effectively from a cost perspective. There's an awful lot of duplication and repetition in education. We have not focused on labor saving at all in education. I think that's something else that could be done, and we could train people better by using these technologies. I'll give you just an example. There's a website I've recently seen. It's just one guy has thousands of YouTube videos up on elementary and middle school and high school mathematics and other disciplines. And they're just he's a born teacher. His name is Khan, so the site is Khan Academy. If there's something you forgot in algebra and you don't want to tell anyone because you're embarrassed you don't know it, go to his website. He'll teach it to you and you'll know it. And it's just one example of literally hundreds that are now on the web. And I think it's going to revolutionize education. I think Delaware should be at the forefront of that.
Thank you.
I'd like to add something to that,
Yes,
if I could.
please.
There was a study that was done on the University of Michigan which showed that in a typical issue of the Sunday New York Times, you have as much information in your hands as the average person during the Middle Ages encountered during their entire lifetime. So what Google is trying to do is of incalculable value. The human brain hasn't changed much over the last 1,000 years. So the more information they can put in the fingertips of you who are trying to generate the new ideas, see the new relationships, the multiplier effect on that is going to be utterly extraordinary.
Thank you. So I have another question, and we are going to be opening up for questions and answers shortly, but we will request that you use the microphones. We do have 2 students in the audience that have microphones to help you out. But I have a final question that if both of you would answer. And it's with regards to remaining innovative. Sometimes when we've been in business, even after a year or two, if it's the same groups, especially those of us that are small businesses and we're interacting with each other regularly, after a while our thinking starts to really be similar because we've been working together and closely for several years. So how do we remain innovative? Al, if you'd like to begin.
Well, I'll give you a case study. I also started a company at one time, and we were involved in early foray into distributed computing. And we had the right idea and had a large impact. However, 4 or 5 years into it, it was clear that a new technology was growing, as often does, that would have a similar kind of impact, but it had more support. It was likely to accelerate. I was kind of slow, and having made the bet on some other ideas and having, frankly, designed a lot of them and the concept, I didn't really want to switch. A colleague of mine had the feeling that I was wrong, and that it was actually the talent of the people was what was crucial, not the software we had written. And he said, we should use our talent to be the leader in this new domain that's similar, but going to go faster. And actually, this happened around the time my company got acquired by IBM, and that technology became the core of a large IBM software family called WebSphere. So the acquisition of my company by IBM was judged quite successful because of these people that made a course correction because they were not as wedded to something. And the course correction, it wasn't that they wanted to go into, say, selling bananas. That would have been ridiculous. We had no skill in selling bananas. But we were skillful in this kind of distributed computing. You do have to be open to change.
Wonderful. David?
I should point out I've had the privilege of knowing Dr. Spector for 40 years now, and during that entire period of time, he's never laughed at a single one of my ideas. So I'm most grateful for that. The other critical issue, I think, is the company has to always be looking outside to try to find people who can advise them, who can make sure they don't get into fur-lined ruts. I'm currently doing a consulting project for one of the major aircraft manufacturers. I know absolutely nothing about aeronautical engineering, the FAA, none of that. But they've asked me to work with them specifically because I don't know any of those. I will ask questions that, because of all their traditions and ways of doing things, they'd never think to ask. So no matter what business you're in, bring in people who are not experts, who will not pat you on the back and say, yes, you're doing the right thing. Bring in people who say, gee, is the emperor wearing any clothes? I'm not sure I even recognize him.
Thank you. So we'd like to open up the floor so that those of you that are in the audience, I'm sure you have some questions that you'd like answered. So we have our 2 students. If you'd please raise your hands if you have a question, and then give us a second to get the microphone to you. Any questions from the audience?
Where do you see, please don't groan, where do you see unions in the process of innovation?
Well, having come from an environment which was heavily union dominated, I think they have a very major role to play, because corporations are downsizing now. They're spending money on buyouts and things like that. I believe they should spend money working through the unions to capture the knowledge that the people who are walking out the door have. This country is losing an amazing amount of hands-on practical talent when people get forced into retirement that will cost us billions of dollars and take millions of, but a lot of years to recapture. So if we're going to be economically competitive, we have to use the union as the lever to help extract that knowledge and make it available.
Thank you.
My name is Fred Hofstetter. I'm a professor of education here, and it's my honor to coordinate the educational technology programs at the University of Delaware. And I just wanted to say how thrilled we are to have Mr. Spector here. I have one serious comment, and then I'd like to have a little fun by asking a question that I look forward to hearing how you respond to. What's serious is that, as you know, your company has created Google Sites, Google Docs, YouTube. Well, you bought YouTube. You have Picasa. You have all these wonderful tools. And what we've discovered since we signed our contract with Google, and now we're a Google Apps university, we've discovered how empowering Google Sites is. That we now believe we can spend 90% of our time helping our students learn how to use the web instead of having to learn how to use Dreamweaver. So we'd like to talk with you about the possibility of partnering in that. We'd like to develop some curriculum materials around it. Of course, it's a moving target, so we'd also like to sort of see if we could form a partnership and learn what some of the future is of how those products will be changing, because that could affect our development. And we might want to talk about an NSF STEM grant, you know, a campus-wide grant to increase the capability of our faculty overall, because we're starting this e-portfolio initiative that's campus-wide. That's a Sakai-based initiative. But the problem will be that our faculty aren't as aware as our students, and so there could be an impediment to moving that project forward. So I'd like to talk with you about some of that, and I'm taking the opportunity because I would imagine you're going to be mobbed by students afterwards, and I'm probably getting a little old to be an entrepreneur, but the idea is to create, I'm not, okay, so the idea is to create opportunities. Now I'd like to have a little fun by asking the following question.
Now, am I supposed to hide behind the sofa at this
well,
time or
you
not?
might, I mean, you might. I've never read the Google mission statement before, and I was surprised to hear you state it, because to me it sounds limiting. Now, it might seem odd that, you know, getting a hold of the world's information sounds limiting, but there's more to it than that.
Well, we don't want to get a hold, we want to organize it. Be careful.
Well, my question is...
We don't desire to own it. We want to organize it.
And you need to put a face on it. So my question is, when will Google buy Facebook?
I should have hid when I had the chance. First, I'm not in business development, but I could make a comment about any large company buying another large company and note that there are regulators and such things involved in that. So I can't comment on that, but other people could and would conclude that certain kinds of things just are unlikely to happen, because it'd be like, you know, Exxon buying Saudi Arabia or something.
Thank you. Question?
Bangalore Lakshman. I'm representing, I'm an entrepreneur when it comes to the non-profit services. And my question to you is how we can apply the innovative thinking that would rather help non-profit organizations with the limited funds, how we can apply that funds to provide efficient services, or to reach more people, or to get our goals of providing the required services. How we can improve our services? Is there any clues?
So let me take that one. So this is really not a Google answer by any means, but I think an answer from the perspective of what's happened with networking technologies. So the services models of providing capability from so-called cloud providers to lots of users around the world has proven very effective for many, not just our company. And it's proven very cost effective. So it's possible to provide to the world services in all the corners of the world, not just the richer corners of the world, that were unimaginable a few years back, provided there's network connectivity. So, for example, after the Haitian earthquake, that just devastating natural disaster, it was very straightforward for Google to get up certain capabilities for people to find each other and geolocation services in Haiti right away because they were served out of data centers that were unaffected and there was network connectivity. So you could do something immediately. These videos that I mentioned on mathematics, if there's network connectivity and you have even an old PC, you can watch them. We could translate those into many languages around the world at very low cost. There are many more examples of the use of, I think, these technologies around the world. Another very important one, let's turn to Africa, probably is telemedicine. Telemedicine has much higher barriers in the US when physicians will be concerned, perhaps rightfully, that they don't get quite as good a visit over a network link. But if the nearest doctor is 100 miles away, telemedicine is a perfectly wonderful idea. And that's something that's quite feasible today as long as there's network bandwidth. So one of the things we've focused on at Google is trying to do things to enhance network bandwidth around the world. In some cases, so we've been involved in Africa in trying to help increase network bandwidth. I think it's soon to be the case, or I forgot the exact timing, someone should check, but there'll be a lot more fiber connectivity to that great continent shortly. We're also looking at, even in this country, what would happen if network bandwidth grew by another factor of 10. Because we just have an enormous amount of belief that bandwidth makes a huge difference. So I think the IT technologies and communication technologies can really help. Education and healthcare are two key starting points because they're the most basic.
Thank you. We had another question?
I think it was answered.
Thomas Friedman, and you answered it just now.
Microphone, please.
I was just going to make a comment. Thomas Friedman had written a book, The World is Flat, and in that book, his postulation was that companies were becoming more important than countries. I was going to kind of ask you about Google's thoughts, but you really actually answered it in the last question.
I don't think companies are more important than countries. I think companies can have a great role in the world when they have good missions and are in that sort of fertile area where a lot of innovation can happen and they've got passionate people to push it forward. But we're not more important than governments.
Thank you. Other questions?
Hi, I was wondering, how does Google evaluate new ideas? Is timing really important, and how do you decide if an idea is too out there to be relevant at the time, or when you hear a lot of ideas within the company, how do you sort through them and decide which ones are the best?
So there are many things. I wish there were 7 steps. There may be 7 steps to understand how to run a business, but to evaluate an idea seems to be a much larger collection of different kinds of things. At least for me, I don't know the secret to it. I think it starts with value. Is there a value proposition for users? And we're a consumer company, primarily. That's our overwhelmingly large focus. So will consumers find something valuable? And that applies even to advertising. If they don't click on an ad, it's not valuable to them, right? If they don't sort of get engaged by the advertisement, it's not providing them anything interesting. So how do we provide value? So if something comes to us and someone says, we could do this and this and this, and it doesn't seem valuable, then we don't look at it. Now, if it seems valuable, but 20 years from now, we think about, well, gee, we're human frailty, 20 years is a long time, will we work on it that long? Even if I'm interested in it, will my successor be interested in it? That's hard. So there we try to factorize the work, try to break it up into factors and say, is there an initial element that would be valuable that then would lead to the next element? And if there isn't, 20 years is a hard thing to, I mean, almost nothing happens like that, right? Most innovation happens in smaller chunks, the sort of 4 or 5 year notions you heard about when startups, hit certain critical mass, I think is true. It's consistent with lifespan of our species. So those are two things. One more I'll give you, and that is the passion of the individual. So if someone comes to me and shows me that they've done market research and shown there's an opportunity in such and such and done all the analysis, okay. If an engineer comes to me and says, I can build this, I think there's an opportunity, I'll go prove that, but I really want to go build it, and I've got a friend who's seen it, and she wants to build it with me, and the two of us will be the perfect team to get this done, that means a lot more at Google, and that means a lot more to most of us. We don't want people that are thinking about thinking. We want about people that are doing.
Thank you. We have, I see even some of my students out here, so I'd like to see if some of our students, other students would have questions as well, but I see we have a question here.
Yeah, good morning. Rich Chappis. I'm on the adjunct faculty teaching a course in sustainability and green business. Sorry. The question is, sustainability, with the triple bottom line, is an integrative kind of function. And, some of the comments you've made, both of you have made, in terms about connections being so important. How do you see the ability to, to move from this space of environment, social, economic, and make those kind of connections, because there's a certain amount of leap that you then, can produce the green business or the new business opportunity that would come out of that connection. Are there more tools that will enable that?
Well, I'm working on a project right now in the Middle East where they are desperately short of water, and the idea of using hydrofracturing of the subsurface to get natural gas is starting to prove itself to be very dangerous for our environment. So using the kinds of tools such as Google, we're able to bring different technologies to bear on the same problem and find whole new solutions to it. In that specific case, there's something called the Stirling Engine that was developed by a British minister in the early 1800s. It works on a temperature differential. So there's lots of hot air over there, and the plate tectonic boundaries are right along the Jordan-Israeli border. So we're going to be pumping just room temperature air down, it'll come back up hot. And that runs night and day. It'll be much cheaper and much less environmental damage. So having all the stuff that's out there on the web now and the search tools to enable us to find it are absolutely critical. The key paper, odd as it sounds, that enabled us to solve this was from the Journal of Biblical Archaeology that looked at the Romans during the time they inhabited the Middle East and where they would build their forts so their merchants and troops could be protected. That gave us a beautiful new look at how to find water in the mountainous regions of the Middle East. Information has been forgotten for 2,000 years.
In general, this notion, I guess, of having vast amounts of data available is new, right? I mean, I don't remember who I was talking with yesterday, but I was reminiscing about the days in the card catalog in a library, and that, if you're going to go write a book report or write something, you allocated 2 days to go find 6 books in the library, of which 6 paragraphs would be useful. And of course, now the vast information that's available to us through just so much of it more being on the web, that's number one, and then 2, now being able to find it, that's number 2. It's just a phenomenal thing. I think we have to remember that no matter what discipline we're in, and this harkens to what you were saying, look broadly at the kinds of information that may be relevant. Because even information, let's say you're a physical scientist and you want to get your project to be successful, you can find the economics literature. You can find the literature on sociology and public behavior and public relations. You can do much more of it now and see the broader picture, which I think gets perhaps to what you were saying. And I think that's something that we have to be careful to do because many of us are highly trained within one discipline. We have to look broadly back to the Journal of Biblical Archaeology. There we go.
Thank you.
Great, another question for you. And I'm going to ask this question as someone that's not from this area and just finished a 10-year overseas assignment. I work for DuPont Chemical. But my question for Delaware and Delaware entrepreneurs and people in this area is, first, when you look at, and maybe it's centered in core competencies, when you look at Delaware, both internationally and nationally, people know that a lot of U.S. companies register in Delaware, okay? And that's been a standard for 50 or 60 years at least. And my question is, that seems to be sort of fading, that reputation as Delaware being a great place to do business and register your company for liability and tax reasons. So I'm wondering if there's a competency there that maybe the state of Delaware ought to be re-energizing, okay? So maybe some perspectives on that. The other thing that's interesting about this area, you've got a lot of materials companies. You've got the DuPonts, the Gores, the Hercules, a lot of other smaller companies with green technologies and that kind of thing. But I've never heard anyone talking about a materials corridor or something like Silicon Valley. So what about that for Delaware? And how could the university and how could the state and how could some of these companies collaborate? And specifically, you know, there's that information piece, how we could cross-collaborate, you know, in simple sense, maybe middleware and those sorts of things. But you know, I'm just curious that there's so much opportunity here and there's some real core competencies in this area that don't seem to be capitalized on. So kind of an open question for you, but what can we do about that to make the state, university, and companies better off? Thank you.
I'd like to take the first part of that. The reason that so many companies are incorporated in Delaware is our Chancery Court, which provides a coherent, rational set of laws and interpretations for having a business. As more and more things get on the computer, there are many, many gray areas. There's already discussion in the state about having a court of information technology. Let's take as an example, if you have your DNA sequenced, with normal medical lab tests, you own the data. But the way DNA is done, they chew it up with enzymes, and then ultimately they have to reassemble the pieces. The law is not clear at all on who owns the information about the pieces. Once it's been assembled, yeah, then it's clear. So Delaware has a great opportunity because they understand business law so well to create another arm off that court so the companies will know where to go for information technology law.
So I'm not from Delaware, so I'm not an optimal person. I think what you were saying, though, does resonate with me, and that is it does make sense to look at core competence. Right, so and the reason I think of that is the persistence of the the information technology corridors, and they're clearly based around the MIT experience that happened after World War II that generated the Boston corridor and all the spin-offs from it, and then the Hewlett-Packard Stanford Industrial Park experience is just two very clear examples. They're very persistent. CMU has been doing one around Pittsburgh. It's a leading computer science university. It's growing. My company was there. Google has an office there, and there are others that are there. It takes a long time to do it. So if you can build off core competence, I think it makes a lot of sense.
To answer your question specifically about materials, though, I started up a chemical company and discovered for all the reasons why we've got DNREC, the Division of Natural Resources, and OSHA, and NIOSH. I even tried to buy some chemicals, which it turns out were the same ones that drug dealers and drug manufacturers use. And after about 1.5 years of trying to get all the permits, I just gave up. If we had some way, maybe building off Delaware Technology Park, where if somebody's got an idea, they can go rent or get access to facilities so they can try something out without having to go to eBay and spend $50,000 building their own lab to run one experiment. That could be enormously useful.
So that's the fertility of the environment, you're saying?
Yes.
It's not fertile enough is what your hypothesis is.
And the university potentially plays a role here, but they've got to look out for their intellectual property interests as well. They can't just let anybody walk in the door, use their equipment, try out an idea, and walk out the door again. There's liability issues. They're accountable to their funding agencies. So it's a difficult road to hoe, but it's really nice to see the government and the university all looking in the same direction for a change. I'm very optimistic.
Hi, my name is Mike Kirby. I'm a recent graduate, and I started a solar sales and installation company in the fall. And we use cloud computing technology, and I really like it. You know, I can access basically my company's all their information from anywhere. Where is cloud technology going to be 5 years from now?
Well, let's see. So the way I think of it is that we are, as an industry, trying to systematically break down all barriers to communication. That's very related to the overall mission of Google, of course, but effectively we're doing that so that you're on a mobile device, you have access. Perhaps you do today, if not, you will soon. Can you speak to a phone and have the results come back audibly if that's most appropriate for a sales call you're on? Can you get the information to people in another land where they're not English speaking? Can you fuse information from multiple sources, images? Can you deal with geodata and overlay it on maps? Can you deal with events and overlay it on time? So is there a smooth integration across all devices, all forms of human language, all the modalities in which we work, from video, audio, image, graphical, geo, et cetera. And then finally, can you do that across, in a seamless way, across everything from your company's private data, which is obviously yours and only available to people at your approval, to all the data that's publicly available in the world and everything in the middle? Can you make that seamless? And I think that's the big mission that we're on. I mean, that's what excites me, is that we have projects, and my colleagues in other companies and universities have projects where we're doing that. I mean, just to give you an example of one aspect of that, Paul Ammer, who's here, who's a professor here at U of Delaware, is doing work on how do we make the communication so incredibly fast that the network doesn't get in the way, that the experience of doing something remotely is as good as it is locally. I mean, I have this vision, my kids are now 10, I play musical instruments with them. What I wonder is, will the networks be so fast that we can still do trios when they're in their dorm rooms in college, which says not only is there enough bandwidth to get high quality audio, there is today, but it has to be done with so little latency that we don't hear echo effects and delay effects. It's feasible. The speed of light does cooperate in that. So we can do it. Those are the kinds of things that will happen. The world is going to be remarkably transparent. The networking technology will be remarkably transparent, leading to a very large amount of fluidity in the world.
I'd like to give a somewhat different answer. Well, I agree with everything that Dr. Spector said. There are bad people out in the world who like to use clouds and networks for nefarious purposes. The U.S. has done a wonderful job of writing laws to protect our privacy and control how people get access to our data and our computers, but bad guys don't subscribe to those laws. We need somewhere a data center where those laws are in abeyance or whatever, so that our country's best computer scientists involved in security can go try out ways of understanding how the people break into these machines. Do things would be illegal anywhere except at that one data center, because more and more of our data is exposed. You look at the attacks on American computers over the last 6 months, it's getting more ferocious and potentially more damaging. And our laws get in the way of our developing suitable defense mechanisms.
Thank you. We have, we're almost wrapping up. We have one more question, because in the back she's been waiting patiently. Can we get a microphone to?
He's also been waiting for a while.
Okay, so 1 and 2, and then we'll have to wrap up.
All right, my name is John Walker. I'm with a startup solar thermal company named Heliothermal, and I have a question that really relates to manufacturing. Over the last several decades, productivity improvements together with labor cost advantages in third world countries have led to a great retraction of manufacturing in the United States. Should the U.S. be working on regaining its part of the global manufacturing environment, and if so, how would we go about doing it?
I'm not a manufacturing person, but I thought the U.S. actually produces more now than it did. It just as a percentage of the economy, it's much less. So I thought with all the labor-saving things we do, we actually have had growth in the industrial economy, just not relative to everything else. So I thought it's at least that could be. But in terms of the gross domestic product from that part of the economy, it's continued to grow. Obviously, we'd like it to grow more. But I'm afraid not. Otherwise, not really an expert on that.
A quick stab at it. Certain industries like textiles have declined every year for the last 60 some odd years. Trying to rebuild that doesn't make sense for our economy. There have been some excellent studies paid for by the Council on Competitiveness out of Washington, which have looked at what do we have to do in terms of managing the intellectual property that underlies a lot of the new opportunities for manufacturing. So they provide some really good reasoned guidance as opposed to the prejudices that I might have.
Thank you. And our final question?
My name is Susan Brenda Son. I'm a librarian. My question or comment is directed to Mr. Spector. I was delighted to hear you mention the demise of the card catalog. I'm happy to tell you that the University of Delaware Library has not had a card catalog for over 20 years. And indeed, today's freshmen do not even know what a card catalog is.
Is that true?
In my interaction with Google over the years in relation to its various projects, I must admit that the Google persons with whom I have interacted have been usually around 22 years old. So I would like to make a comment about Google's activities, which I very much support, but which have caused difficulties and complexities for the nation's libraries, especially its research libraries, in that Google seems to be, have the premise that which has been accepted by American society, and indeed by the faculty and the people in this room, that if it is electronic, it must be free. And the nation's libraries, including the University of Delaware Library, are spending millions, billions of dollars to provide access to licensed databases. I would like to, and in the world of the demise of newspapers, with the diminishing investigative reporting, the concept of intellectual property seems very remote from Google. And although it's in courts right now, and I recognize that, what I would like to recommend to Google is that it use its enormous resources in two areas to advocate and lobby for the public domain access for federally sponsored research, which is in Congress right now. And the other thing is to use its resources to lobby for term limits on copyright. Right now, everything that is in copyright right now will be in copyright and protected for everyone's lives in this room. It will never be in public domain. And the term limits have been so extended that by Walt Disney and others, that mainly by the Disney lobbying, that we've lost access to the potential for access to the world's information.
I think my comment is that was an extremely eloquent statement that stands on its own. Thank you for saying it.
Well, we have reached our time limit. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. Thanks, everyone, for all your great questions. And Dr. Jones?
Thank you all.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
I think we can certainly conclude that the future of creativity and innovation appears to be information and knowledge, and there's a whole lot the courts have to figure out about that. So thank you for those insights. At this time, we're going to take a brief 10-minute intermission while we reset for our next panel. So stand up, stretch, and do a little networking right here in the auditorium, if you would.